Well, it's been about 3 weeks since a ceasefire took hold in the war between Iran and the United States, but a permanent end to the conflict, it still seems as distant as ever. Talks planned for last week were canceled, and a new proposal from Iran yesterday has yet to get any formal response from Washington. As the conflict drags on, global trade continues to suffer.
The wait to clear tankers in the Strait of Hormuz is now in its 9th week. While a ceasefire is in place, the US and Iran continue to trade barbs over who is to blame. Here's US Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking to Fox News.
The Straits is basically the equivalent of an economic nuclear weapon that they're trying to use against the world.
Iran, though, rejects that.
Responsibility for any disruption to maritime transport lies with the aggressors, the United States and its supporters.
The latest peace proposal would reportedly see both sides ease their blockades of the strait while broader negotiations continue, including over the future of Iran's nuclear program. But US President Donald Trump is said to be unhappy with what's on offer.
I don't want to get ahead of the president or his national security team. What I will reiterate is that the president's red lines with respect to Iran have been made very, very clear, not just to the American public, but also to them as well.
The effective closure of the strait has caused chaos for global supply chains, particularly oil exports from the Gulf. Qatar has warned against the fighting turning into a, quote, frozen conflict.
We need to solve this issue. And we need to find an end that would give the security of the world a rest from what is happening right now, but also would provide sustainable solutions for the future.
Even if a deal to end the war is reached soon, clearing the backlog in the Strait of Hormuz could take months. Shipbroker BRS warned this week that it will take until at least September for a return to something resembling normality.
And joining me now is Fawaz Gerges. He is a professor of Middle Eastern politics and international relations at the London School of Economics. Fawaz, it's good to see you again. We have heard from the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, calling Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz an economic nuclear weapon. What do you make of that?
Well, actually, let me rephrase what the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said. Actually, Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is bigger and more important than its defunct nuclear program. It's the blockade, Iran blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is the biggest bargaining card that Iran has now and in the future, as a leverage of coercion that could use for years to come. And the question, I'm surprised that the journalist who interviewed the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, for our audience, Marco Rubio is not just the Secretary of State, he's the head of the US National Security Council. And the US National Security Council, the main function is to provide the president with various options in terms of national security. And the fact is that Marco Rubio did not really warn the President Trump, about the fact that Iran could and use the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz if and when the United States launched a unilateral war against Iran. Here we are. You and I and everyone is talking about Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. It was really open. It has always been open since the 1980s.
Well, Fawaz, let me ask you then, where we stand right now in terms of how to deal with the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. President Trump, he remains opposed to first making a deal on reopening the strait and only then discussing Iran's nuclear program. I'm sure he's being advised by people such as Marco Rubio. So what do you make of him saying, no, I'm not going to take one deal and then work on another deal?
You know, again, for our audience, both sides are engaged in a high-stake diplomacy. It's a war by other means. Remember, it's a continuation. Diplomacy is a continuation of war by other means. There's a huge rift between the two sides. And that's why Iran proposed a limited trust-building measure. Iran will open the Strait of Hormuz for shipping, and the United States will end its blockade of Iranian ports. Of course, President Trump does not like it. Why? Because it would mean really defeat. Because the president, American media and American will come to see, well, look, what did you do? I mean, now you're opening, it's all about the Strait of Hormuz. So I think it's a non-starter for President Trump, because this would be seen as really a major defeat for President Trump. And that's why I think the blockade will remain for a long time, unless the two sides will find ways and means to bridge their differences. My take is that they will ultimately do so, because both sides do not really want to return to hostilities. Both sides want to find a way out of this deadly embrace.
I've got about a minute left. I want to make sure I ask you, the UAE today made a bombshell announcement saying that it's withdrawing from the OPEC oil cartel. Do you see a connection to the war against Iran here?
Absolutely. I mean, the war has exacted a heavy toll against the United Arab Emirates economy and society. So what the United Arab Emirates is trying to do is to really basically get out of OPEC and be able to produce millions of barrels of oil, modernize its oil industry, so it will help it to really absorb some of the economic losses. But more importantly, I think there is a geopolitical dimensions. Relations between the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have deteriorated a great deal. And the fact that the United Arab Emirates now pulls out of OPEC, in which Saudi Arabia is the most important player, tells me that relations between the two most important and former allies will deteriorate further and will have a major impact on the Gulf Cooperation Council, its unity and its effectiveness.
Fawaz Gerges, always good to get your insights on this. Fawaz, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Just moments ago, I talked with René Wildangel, a journalist and scholar focusing on the Middle East. I asked him for his take on the latest efforts to negotiate an end to the war.
Well, it's obvious that there is no solution yet. The ceasefire started on April 8th. We've seen a first round of negotiations that did not produce any progress. And the latest proposal from Iran is basically saying, okay, we will open the Strait of Hormuz, but let's talk about the nuclear issue later. This is not something that the Trump administration wants to accept. And I think we are in a very dangerous situation. We're not only talking about frozen conflict, but we're also talking about renewed conflict. We have also seen rising US military presence in the region again. And if these negotiations fail, I think it is not unlikely that we might see renewed confrontation. And that is a horror vision for everybody in the region.
Well, as you mentioned, President Trump is reportedly not happy with the latest Iranian proposals. Short of Iran submitting to all American demands, what do you think it would take for the U.S. to reach a settlement with Iran?
Well, I think the problem is that we're in a situation now where we can see that Iran has considerable leverage. This is not something that obviously Trump expected when he started this war. He was starting this war from a position of power, he thought, and they talked before the war about dictating conditions on the Iranian leadership. Now we're in a very different situation. We've just heard that Foreign Minister Rubio has called the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz an Iranian nuclear bomb, which is kind of ironic. But that just shows you how big the power and the leverage of the Iranians here is. And this is also, I think, the reason why they are not making any progress right now in negotiations, and where they basically say, we don't want to talk about the nuclear file at all, because they think they can get away with it right now.
Several countries are trying to mediate in this conflict. We've got Turkey, Egypt, Russia, and above all, Pakistan. How important are their efforts to end this war?
Well, their efforts are very important. We've seen a first round in Pakistan. Pakistan has good relations with both countries. That's also true for other countries that you mentioned, such as Turkey. But all of those countries don't have the leverage over Iran and over the US. I mean, it's the two conflict parties that need to make a decision here and might need to find a deal. The problem, as I said, is that this war changed the equation. The ironic thing is we're kind of back to square one. Before the war, Iran and the US were negotiating about a new nuclear deal under the mediation of Oman. And we know from the Omani foreign minister, just from the days before this attack on Iran started, that the chances for a nuclear settlement were not bad. Now they look very distant. And let me mention another problem. We're only talking now about the nuclear problem in the Strait of Hormuz. What we're not talking about is the future of Iran. 2,000 Iranians died in this attack. And we've seen renewed repression. We see daily executions. We see detention, mass detention in Iran. This is an issue that President Trump and others need to be unhappy about and need to raise in the negotiations, in my opinion.
And we still haven't talked about Iran's ballistic missile program. Iran's Gulf neighbors, not to mention Israel, feel particularly vulnerable to attack by Iranian missiles and drones, we should mention. What would an acceptable end to the war look like from their perspective?
Well, to be honest, I don't know, because when the attack started in the end of February, the official claim was that this attack is supposed to end and eliminate the ballistic missile program, the nuclear program, and now it turns out no. Only by military means you cannot solve this problem. You need negotiations. This is true in Iran, by the way. That's also true in Lebanon. That's also true in Gaza when you talk about non-state armed groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah. And it's also true when you talk about Iran, because we've seen that the Iranian capacity has been diminished considerably, but Iran is still able to threaten the US in the Strait of Hormuz and beyond this. So this is a problem that we cannot solve militarily, and we need a new strategy. And unfortunately, President Trump at this point doesn't have that strategy at all. And this is where I personally would like to see the Europeans and others to come in and actually come towards a strategy where we are again investing in diplomacy.
At the end of all this, René, if and when we get there, could we end up seeing a nuclear deal with Iran that's really not much better than the one that President Obama negotiated and Trump pulled out of?
Yes, if any nuclear deal at all. And that's the ironic thing. I mean, this deal that we've seen in 2011 by the European Union and the US, the JCPOA, was harshly criticized. And maybe for some, it was rightly criticized. But at least we had some transparency. We had inspectors in Iran. We more or less knew what was going on. The problem now is that the lesson for the Iranian government from this whole attack might be the only way to protect ourselves from renewed aggression is actually a nuclear bomb. So in the worst case, this whole conflict does not lead to a settlement, but it will lead to renewed arms race in the region and also a nuclear arms race, which is the worst possible outcome, honestly.
René, thank you very much for your thoughts. Journalist and scholar René Wildangel there.
Thank you, Terry.